You can't imagine that there are prisons in the world that are so crowded that some inmates have to sleep standing up or squatting on the dirty floor, because there is no room to lie down and make a bed, and standing for a long period of time can cause poor blood flow to the lower limbs, which can lead to maggot infections that cause ulcers in the feet. Once this happens, the inmates can either die in a bandage or amputate their limbs, but there is obviously no room for amputation in the prisons, and that's why we've got to see what happens. This is what really happened in a Rwandan prison in 1995. West of Kigali, the country's capital, there is a prison called Gitarama, now renamed Muhanga Prison. The prison's capacity is disputed. It's estimated at between a few hundred and 1,000, but in reality, there are 8,000 inmates, and the conditions in the prison are dirty. But in fact, they are not hygienic at all, with garbage, human remains, and fecal matter everywhere, and some of these people sleep standing up on an open patio. Whether or not you can fall asleep, I'm not sure. I don't know if they can sleep or not, but some of them fall asleep and never wake up. The courtyard is bad enough, but the inside of the cells is worse than the outside. Not even as comfortable as a pigsty in the countryside. Imagine a room filled with more than 500 prisoners, not to mention sleeping. Even breathing is a bit difficult. I believe that you can feel the aroma of the room through the screen. I'm afraid that even flies passing by this place will have to hold their breath. Although the crowded environment of the prison is already considered torture for the prisoners, but even more crushing to them is that the prison guards will also be beating the prisoners like a cracked ear and a bruise on the lips, as well as bruises all over the body are many people rather than. A prison is a hell on earth. So quietly, look at these prisoners with a blank stare and a despairing face, and from a distance, look at the black mass like Walking Dead. The guards also beat the inmates severely. Their ears are cracked and their lips bruised. Many people have scars all over their bodies. Instead of being a prison, this place feels like hell on earth. When you observe the inmates from a distance, you notice their empty eyes filled with despair. They appear like the Walking Dead. What's even more shocking is the situation where inmates rely on relatives to send them supplies, because Gitarama Prison, due to lack of funds, cannot provide adequate food and necessities. Visits take place outside the walls due to overcrowded conditions inside the prison. If inmates have no relatives or friends to bring them food, they go hungry. They can be starved 9 times in 3 days, and eventually starve until their bellies turn over. There are even reports of prisoners who, out of hunger and desperation, have been known to fight to the death and eat the corpses of the losers in order to survive. However, according to Rwanda, these reports of cannibalism are purely fabricated. In addition to the adults, the prison also houses hundreds of children under the age of 16, of whom the youngest is only 10 years old, and most of the prisoners have to wait several years before they are tried and convicted. However, under the threat of various diseases, some of them die before they even meet the judge. Most of the inmates have to wait several years before they are tried and convicted, but with all the diseases that threaten to kill them before they even see a judge, it can be said that being in prison here is the same as being in the ground. And since the prison can't hold any more inmates, the authorities have had to suspend arrests. It is known that on April 7, 1994, the Hutus began a genocide against the Tutsis, killing about 1 million people in 100 days, most of them victims. Eventually, a counterattack defeated the confused government and decided to arrest the genocidaires who had participated in the massacres. Some of the confused people who feared reprisals fled to the borders of neighboring countries and formed huge refugee camps, and many of them had participated in the massacres due to the lack of food and shelter. In the end, the refugees had to think about going back to their homelands, but many of those who did return were forced to leave their homelands under the fear of genocide. Many innocent people who returned to Rwanda were forced to leave their homes in fear of the massacres, and were eventually accused by their neighbors and friends of participating in the genocide, which is why Rwanda's prison population has skyrocketed. In addition to overcrowded prisons, the country's courts are virtually paralyzed, as many of the buildings and courthouses have been destroyed since the massacres, and the lack of judges means that prisoners have to wait for years to be tried and convicted. And even for those who do have access to a lawyer and a judge, there are not enough investigators available to question witnesses and prepare evidence. Even if lawyers and judges were available, there were no investigators to question witnesses and prepare evidence, either of those who had participated in the massacres or of the unlucky innocents.
All face the same harsh prison conditions and are even overcrowded to the point of sleeping standing up. This is the dreaded Gitarama prison in Rwanda, a place that the Los Angeles Times once called hell.